are.
We're still a man down there, right?
Yes. Hi again. I just realised I never introduced myself the last time. So I am Gillian Roddy. I'm the Education and Learning Manager in Science Gallery here. Interim. I'm covering Ray Turley, who's on maternity leave at the moment. So we're going to move on now and move on to our panel discussion, which we are extremely excited about. We are very, very privileged and honoured to have a very special guest here. I mentioned earlier that the British Council and the British Embassy have been supporting us here for the summer school and indeed for today. So I would like to introduce you to Sarah Tiffin. Sarah is the Deputy Head of Mission at the British Embassy and has been in Dublin since September 2017, and this is her second posting to Ireland. Before being posted to Dublin, Sarah worked at the British Embassy in Warsaw, also as Deputy Head of Mission, and in addition to Dublin and Warsaw, she has previously been posted to Paris, New Delhi and the UK representation to the EU in Brussels. Sarah has also worked in the FCO as Head of the East Africa Department and on Human Rights Policy, on policy planning and on human resources. Imposter syndrome right here. She's married to an Irish husband, yes, and has 3 children. So I would like you all to give a very, very, very warm welcome to Sarah Tiffin.
Thanks, Julie. I think that's the most enthusiastic introduction I've ever had. I feel slightly cowed. And I'm just the warm-up act, and you have got a brilliant panel lined up to have a discussion, so I won't hold the panel back. But I did want to come and just say a few words at the beginning, because we're so proud at the British Embassy to have had the opportunity to support this summer school. It hits all the right notes for us. It's about science, it's about innovation, it's about young people getting together and exchanging ideas, it's about looking forward, and we were really excited to have the opportunity to offer some support. And this particular session just also hits lovely notes from our point of view. A lot of it is about communication. It's slightly daunting standing here having just witnessed that wonderful group of people explaining how you need to do public speaking and how you don't, and I'm now kind of but communication, I absolutely agree with the team that were talking about it. It's so important, and not just about communicating science. You need to know how to communicate to get on in the world, and you need to know how to communicate to enthuse people about the passions that you have. And part of that here is very much about science. I had the great privilege of being here and actually bringing my kids along to the Fame Lab event this year. And it was just so exciting watching all these young people standing up and proclaiming their interest in incredibly complex and sometimes quite obscure things. And my kids, who are 15, 13 and 11, were totally gripped all the way through. It was a wonderful event. And also, communication is about realising your potential. I was really privileged last week to be part of the visit by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, which you might have seen mentioned in the newspapers here. And one of the high points was a discussion at Dogpatch Labs. First of all, they met a whole load of young people who are part of the Coder Dojo programme, learning how to code, and who were just brimming over with enthusiasm about the things they'd created through learning to code with Coder Dojo. And then they sat down and had a discussion with some really serious, impressive, mostly women. There was a bit of tokenism. We had one man on the panel, talking about getting women involved in tech. And you could see the Duchess of Sussex was absolutely gripped by the conversation. It overran by about 10 minutes because they just didn't want to stop talking. So talking really does make things happen. And I think it would be, I'll refer to the B word. At a time when we're dealing with Brexit, which is all the embassy ever seems to have time to think about, it's really important that we just keep talking, because it's through talking in the end that we're going to get through this. And it's a vital skill for all of you as you move on into the workplace. If you know how to walk into a room of people you've never met and work that room and talk to people confidently and engage with people you don't know and put your case and listen to people and really do active listening and be able to respond to what they're saying to you, that's a huge set of skills that will get you anywhere in life. So I think the subject of this symposium is really exciting. And then I love also the fact that this is about young people and the links and engagement between young people. So coming back to the Brexit theme, it's true that we live in strange times, and the embassy talks and thinks a lot about how we're leaving the EU. But the other thing we think about is, what is the future going to look like when the UK is outside the European Union, particularly here in Ireland, where we just have this incredible habit of cooperation. British and Irish officials just talk to each other all the time. It's a complete pain for the embassy because we never know who's talking to who, because they just pick up the phone to each other, and all the policy goes on without us even having to know that the conversations are happening. That's a habit that's grown up over years in the EU because we're all talking about the same things at the same time. You're talking about whatever's on the EU's agenda, and as often as not, we tend to be pretty much on the same side and talking to each other, expert to expert, about what we should do within the EU. What we need to do in the future is work out all the new ways that we're going to maintain that habit of cooperation between these two countries, because it's so important that we do. This is the most unique and special relationship, and I don't just say that because I have an Irish husband and 3 kids who are half Irish and half British. It genuinely is something different from any other relationship we have. So at the embassy, we spend a lot of time thinking about how are we going to make that happen? How are we going to maintain that kind of ease and that habit of just talking to each other about everything when we don't have, a Brussels agenda driving it? And a lot of that is actually about doing more together, thinking more consciously about what we can do together on issues like science and innovation and education. So this discussion is kind of right at the heart of everything we're talking about. And also the future of this relationship, the future of the UK's relationship with Ireland, the future of the EU actually lies with you. It lies with young people. And we need to make sure that young people from both our countries find ways to talk to each other, find ways to challenge each other, find ways to agree with each other. And I think this week is a fantastic element of that, and that's why we're so, as I said, so proud to be supporting it. So fostering those links. If you come out of this having found it stimulating to be talking to people who are coming from a different background, from a different country, who are thinking about things slightly differently, think yourselves about how do you carry on fostering those links? How do you carry on talking to new people and getting fresh ideas? You've got a great panel lined up, lots of really excellent experts, and I'm not going to keep you from them. But really proud to be part of this event. I loved the snippet that I saw, the two elements that I saw when I came in a bit late. I'm absolutely delighted to be here and looking forward to hearing what you all have to say. So thank you very much.
Okay, very briefly, I'm just going to ask everyone to actually take out your phones or devices and go to slido.com. You'll see a box there. It will ask you for the event, which is #Youth Symposium. From there, rather than do a traditional Q&A at the end of the session with roaming mics, we'd actually like you to ask your questions during the session. So you can type them in. You'll see it's quite easy. You can also upvote people's questions while the event is happening. So the questions that come up to the top, our moderator, Andrea Bandelli, will be able to see them on the iPad. So if you see a question that you really want to have asked, you can upvote it and it will get to the top, and Andrea will ask it during the actual panel presentation. If you have any trouble getting onto the Wi-Fi or accessing the system, just raise your hand and I can come around and help, or just ask the buddy next to you to pop a question in if you just can't get your device to connect. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And at any time, however, if you really want to ask that question, raise your hand, shout, and we'll answer that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you really to the British Embassy, British Council, and our 3 universities today, Trinity College Dublin, King's College, and Ca' Foscari, for allowing this event to take place. It's really remarkable, and as you said, it is so important to have these moments of conversation and inspiring dialogues with such talented people. My name is Andrea Bandelli. I'm the director of Science Gallery International, the network of science galleries and the universities that operate Science Gallery. It's wonderful actually to be in a room knowing the audience, because we had this wonderful exercise this morning, so we all know each other. And today, indeed, the topic of the conversation is extremely exciting. You know, we have 40 minutes to talk about the revolutionizing the world, basically, which is the future of education and employment. So we'll get there, and we'll get there with a wonderful panel. You know some of them because they were part of the exercise this morning. But I'll just introduce very briefly our four speakers, and then we'll have indeed a conversation. We do have indeed the possibility to ask questions, and of course the purpose also is really to inspire you and to keep those conversations going on also in the afternoon. So here to my left is Stacey Woolsey, who indeed is a young leader at Science Gallery London, and yay! And she's in the middle of a year-long project to create her own MA, her own master's. And I just want to read this quote she sent me. So, I wanted to do a traditional MA, but I'm unable to find myself through a course, so I decided to make my own. How wonderful is that? Creating a community feel and entirely personal curriculum sourced from designers industry whose work I love, to provide myself with a year of free and completely unique education. So that's Stacey. Next is Emily Niemann. She's a PhD candidate at the School of Education here at Trinity College Dublin, studying geoscience education in Irish primary and secondary schools, using a children's rights-based methodology, and writing her thesis in a creative, non-fictional format. I want to hear more about that. Her research is funded by an Irish Research Council Postgraduate Scholarship Award, and she's currently an early career researcher at the Trinity Longroom Hub Arts and Humanities Institute, and convener of the monthly Talk About Education research seminars, the School of Education, and she holds an MS in geology. Next is Ronan O'Dalley.
Yeah.
Okay, I got kind of Irish pronunciation lessons yesterday evening, but with my background, it's good. Ronan, thank you for being here. He's a social entrepreneur from Clondalkin.
Yeah.
Getting there. Dublin. He's a venture socialist, and the organization he heads up, SEDCO, specializes in using entrepreneurship as a tool for poverty eradication and social transformation. In 2013, Ronan received the Irish Presidential Youth Award, and he worked for Unilever as a financial business partner, and then had an astonishing career as a social entrepreneur, with remarkable contribution to student societies and youth civic engagement. And in 2015, he was elected the Global Shaper by the World Economic Forum and is a member of Changemaker for Change, the world's largest social enterprise collaboration network for social entrepreneurs under 30. And next to him is Brian McGuire. He's a recent graduate of electronic engineering at Trinity College Dublin, now looking to go down a more creative pathway in their career. And working at Science Gallery in the past as a mediator helped Brian immensely in developing a passion for art-science collaboration and education reform, and a keen interest in how these areas can help us create a better future. Brian is also interested in examining how capitalist structures within society have created barriers between people and the future that they should have access to. So it's indeed a fantastic panel, and I would like to start asking a question to all of you. Really, what if we think about the skills and the life qualities that you need to do what you're currently doing, could you indeed tell us what you need, and especially, and this is a bit of a provocation, why the formal education system is not providing them? So, Stacey, you want to start?
First.
Yeah, you go first.
I don't think it's a particular skill or anything kind of, you need to be like this to do this. For me, like, I was in education for so long, and then I got to a point where I couldn't access it any further. And I think it took me a lot of time to kind of get the balls to be like, no, I'll do my own thing. So I don't think it was a skill set. I think it was more like a mind change and kind of an annoyance that it wasn't working, so I was just going to do it anyway. And I don't think that's particularly a unique thing I have. I think at some point everyone will get to a point where they just had enough of it and do what they want. you can go.
Okay. The thing that I think that we need to focus more on in education is, and I don't like all the buzzwords, but like being self-directed. When I was in school, and I think it is changing, there was a lot of learn this off. You know, one of my teachers would literally just write everything on the board and we would take it down and we were expected to replicate it in an exam. That's never going to happen in, like, once you get past the leaving cert, and for some of you, once you get past the university exams, because some university exams are still like that, what you really need to be able to do is be curious, find information yourself, which a lot of you are going to be really good at. Those of us who are millennials or Generation Z, I think we're now, coming up, we're good at finding information. And then what we need to learn to do is critically evaluate that information and use that information. And that's a lot of what I do. As a researcher, I spend all my time reading things, trying to figure out those things, and then writing. Writing is so important. So I really like to see more of that in the formal education system, and see it valued.
Yeah, I think for me it's actually quite similar. Is in my work, I suppose, in entrepreneurship, the single biggest skill you need really is persistence. You need to be able to keep going when shit hits the fan, when things don't go well, when funding applications aren't successful, when you think things aren't going to work. You kind of just have to keep going. And I don't think really that's something that is taught in our formal education systems. I think the most important thing, though, is the element of freedom. So, like, our education system is set up in a way to produce defined results. So we say, young people, go into this system and here's what you're going to come out with at the end. And it kind of strips away your sense of personal freedom to make your own decisions. Especially I would have found personally in secondary level education. I mean, for me, it was just, I was constantly in fights with the teachers about, why are you teaching me this? I have no interest in learning this. I want to be learning this. Can you create the space for me to go over here? And, you know, we set up a student council and protested, and it was just a struggle, and it was like the opposite of everything it should have been, you know. And then in third level education, actually, I studied in DCU. So it was, I had a really good experience in college because I was given the freedom to pursue, you know, extracurricular stuff. I totally flunked in loads of my exams, and I was delighted because I was like, well, actually, I'm being supported over here to do all this other extracurricular stuff, student politics, societies, and that was really what I wanted to do. So I think what we need to be looking at is how do we implement the element of freedom and pursuit of your own actual interests and passions into the secondary level curriculum. I mean, it's one of the great things that actually DCU does is they have a module called the Union module, and you get 10 credits for pursuing extracurricular stuff, and you can swap it for one of your actual academic modules. I mean, I would be saying that universities should be looking at a model where you can do up to half your degree or a majority of your degree in anything that you decide and pursue something that is completely up to you. But it'd be very hard for universities to pursue that if we're not looking at it in secondary level. So I think the more extracurricular stuff that we're doing in secondary schools is where some big impact could be had.
Yeah, I'd kind of completely agree with Ronan, where even in university education, I don't think there's this huge focus on kind of like departmentalization of all the different areas, whereas I'm also a big advocate, and I'm really interested to hear about your thesis and the way you're writing it. I'm a huge advocate for kind of collaboration between the arts and sciences and kind of like closing that gap between the faculties. And one thing that, yeah, I think is lacking in a lot of university education as well, secondary school education, is that freedom to play and to actually be creative and have fun and kind of find your passions and go approach education from a very philosophical standpoint and be like, this is what's important to me, this is why I'm approaching this in this sort of way, and to be able to tie in all the different sorts of elements that come into that sort of very philosophical viewpoint. So as a recent graduate of electronic engineering, I was always torn between kind of the creative side of things and science and engineering, and it's only kind of now that I'm actually seeing that I can actually combine those two things. So I would have studied a lot of sort of media processing in my last year of college, and I'm looking to now do sort of like video installations and kind of like stuff like that in art. So it's, yeah, I'd also say to anyone, like, don't ever feel that you're going to be like trapped into any one sort of box by what you choose. It's all, you'll always get to change and kind of like kind of get to access all of the areas of your life that you want to access. But from an early age, it doesn't seem like that's possible. Like, it takes a long while, and it needs to be kind of more structured into the education system, where it's like you have this freedom to play.
Wonderful, thank you. We'll come back to the role of the education system, because there are also some really very interesting questions. But I would like to pose one question that I just read. How do you know that your career path, or the path that you are choosing now, is the right one for you?
I don't think you do know.
No, you don't.
I think, I mean, when I was always at school and any kind of career help I was given, it was like pick a job and work back how to get there. But I think there's kind of like a growing change in everyone at our kind of age group, where it's kind of like, figure yourself out and then figure that out and then figure out what everybody wants from you and kind of just give it to people rather than kind of go and get in a job role, make yourself employable and create yourself a job.
And that has upsides and downsides, because it can also be a lot of pressure to, first of all, to figure yourself out, and also to think, like, it used to be that you could do a degree and walk into a job, and you'd have that job for 40 years, and then you would retire and you would have a pension. And increasingly, that's not an option for a lot of people. And that puts an awful lot of, because a lot of people would be very happy to be, whatever, an engineer or a postman or whatever, and they could find themselves outside of that on weekends and evenings, and not having financial stability is a big problem, I think, for our generation. But you don't know what when I entered college, I did theoretical physics. I changed almost immediately to experimental physics. I realized that my true love was geology, so I changed to geology. I graduated geology. I was like, okay, we're doing this now. And went back to physics, to geophysics for my MSc, and then realized, no, I actually don't like this either. And now I'm doing education and writing a lot, and I really like that. But in 5 years' time, I might change again. My father is still saying that he's going to figure out what he's going to be when he grows up pretty soon, next couple of years.
And Emily, since there is a question which is getting a lot of traction, is can you expand a little bit on what it means a children's right approach in your writing? And
Yes, of course. Yeah. So my project is looking at geoscience education in Irish primary and secondary schools. And as many of you probably went to Irish primary and secondary schools, you might know that we don't do very much. And I think that's an opportunity for us to grow, because one of the groups was talking about climate change. We're going to have to make huge decisions as a country about climate change, and I would like to see a higher level of geoscientific literacy for the next generation of Irish children who become Irish voters and Irish citizens. So the way that I'm doing it is by a children's rights-based methodology, where rather than me coming in with my lab coat and my scary face and saying, okay, children, tell me, if you do that, children will tell you whatever you want to hear. And it's not a very good way to get very accurate data, because children are very, very smart, and they use language differently to adults a lot of the time as they're experimenting with language. And if you ask them questions, they will read you and try to figure out if you want a yes or a no, and then try to give you what you want, because you're a teacher, you're an adult, you're a parent, you're scary. So instead of doing that, I'm doing groups with the children, and this isn't like focus groups. I'm not asking them questions. Groups of children get to help me design the research, the questionnaires that I use, or the questions that I ask, so that when I send them out to all the other children that I'm studying, it's in the kind of language that they want to listen to, and they get explained to by people their own age. This is what we're doing and why. And it's really important to tell them why. Why am I doing this? Why do I need to know this? Like, not just taking their information and then going off, and I don't want to say profit by it, because I'm definitely not going to get money, but get papers out of it. So that's my, and then when I get the results, the children get to have input on the results. So my supervisor did this with a group, and one of the questions they asked was, what's your favorite subject in school? And lots of people said art, I think was the most popular, and maybe PE was really popular, and science wasn't the most popular. And the adults looked at this and thought, great, kids don't like science these days. And they brought it to the kids, and the kids said, no, what are you talking about? We love science. We just love other things too. We really like, when we put any of those subjects on the list, it means we really like them. Whereas the adults weren't getting that from the way that they had phrased the question and they had interpreted it. So that's including children in the process, and it's based on the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of the Child. And then very quickly, because I don't want to, well, I mean, I'd be perfectly happy to talk for a long time about my project, but
Later.
I shouldn't. I'm writing it in creative nonfiction, so I'm writing it as an epistolary, which is a group of documents, usually letters. Has anyone read Dracula? Dracula, the novel? Yeah, some of you have. Read Dracula, it's great. I was reading Dracula, and the thing about Dracula is that it's you follow the story, you follow the action by hearing different voices through this like narrative. So I'm doing the same thing with my thesis. Rather than just getting the end product where I explain it all to you in academic language, I'm writing emails, journal extracts, poems, stories, short stories that follow the research as it happens. And then when you read through it, hopefully it'll be fun to read. And also you'll see the process of the research, not just the outcomes of the research, in a much more like close way for you to get close to that action. And also it's way more fun to write. So that was probably my most important reason.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, Emily, somebody is asking, do you think your timing in college rocked?
Yes. I get that all the time.
Excellent. Going on this line, for Ronan and Brian, I would indeed like to ask the question was how do you know if your choice and your career path is right? But there is a very interesting question here is also how do we overcome the barriers created by the current almost tribal political climate? When you don't agree with somebody, you're automatically wrong. This tension that a lot of people seem to feel about the current indeed political and social climate, and how do you know that indeed you are making the right choices? Do you know?
I mean, I think for me what this comes down to is, I think what we're in the midst of is, yeah, there's political strife and everything that's going on at the moment, but it's also a challenge of the collective versus the self. So what we're being kind of subversively pushed into is a place where we're being told to make all the decisions kind of by ourselves, and that the decisions about our life need to be really self-centric. And I don't think this is a conspiracy or anything. I mean, I think it's just a natural confluence of certain things coming together. So the rise of social media, the current political arena. So what's very easy to happen is you get into a narrative where it's all about yourself. It's all about what are the decisions I'm making in my life, and how does that reflect, and what does the world and what does everything that's going on politically mean for me. And I think what we need to be doing is taking a step back from that and saying, it's the collective that's really important. And it's my friend groups, it's my family groups, and it's my social groups around me. That's how we have always made decisions. That's how we've always been influenced by the direct people in our lives. It's not necessarily being totally driven by our own sense of self-direction. And I think actually, if I reflect on, going back to the earlier question, is my career the right thing I'm doing now? I think I made a mistake initially coming out of college, and I was in a space where I really wanted to do something entrepreneurial. And I think I did it too quickly. And I think it was because I didn't rely as much as I should have on the people around me, my friends, my family. I was kind of too self-centered in it all, and I kind of wanted to do it for some of the wrong reasons. And I think one of the best things we can do when we're in education, third level education or secondary education, is build in those supportive structures around you. So your friends, your family, student societies, that kind of thing. And what you'll really quickly understand is that there isn't this massive polarity in opinion. Like, it's nonsense. This kind of idea that society is split, it's madness. Like, society isn't split. It's just not true. Like, you look at all of the opinion polls, you look at all of the research. Yes, there are political issues which people have different arguments on, but at the end of the day, if you go and talk to anybody on a one-to-one basis in the real life, what you'll understand is, Jesus, we're actually really, really similar in 90% of how we think about things. and in how we think, in our basic values of compassion and in our basic values of how we think society should function. And I think it's about going back to that, so switching off the social media and going to a real space and actually just talking with real people, because it's only through other people that you can get a reflection of yourself.
Thank you. Brian, you are in a phase, in a moment where you consciously made a choice to take a break from education.
So yeah, I suppose for myself, I'm currently in a position where I'm like not sure if I'm making the right decisions or things like that. It's very, very scary. Like for one thing, I'm kind of trying to go a bit more of like freelance and just try and create my own projects for myself and like do things like that, and that's terrifying because I don't have a steady stream of income or anything like that. And it's like
universal basic income.
Yeah, exactly. So that's another thing, and it's something I've had a conversation about like a couple of times. Is like things like universal basic income would be fantastic, so that people have that opportunity to play again. It's a really important thing. But yeah, so that you don't have that fear of maybe getting, like one thing I was like, oh, I should probably get like a full-time job that sustains me, but then I won't be able to do the things that I actually really want to do. And it's trying to balance like, okay, the practicality of it and kind of, so, and then kind of like tying into the sort of political question as well. I agree with Ronan where there's a huge, I think a lot of that sort of fear of criticism or kind of fear of making the wrong decisions on a societal basis comes from a very basic fear in people to be vulnerable and to kind of, to just kind of let down sort of like ego and kind of like break that down a little bit. And that really builds up into kind of these mass sort of political divides at times. So I think on a very basic level, you need to kind of, again, focus on kind of like community development. I think is a very good thing to kind of like help people tap into that more like vulnerable side of themselves again, and work in that sort of direction.
A bit of like self-investment, like taking that time and space to actually think about, not the big picture and what I'm doing next, just taking a minute to like just stop and be like, wait, this is maybe nice and this is nice as well, but not to be so pressured into like the speed of things and keeping things going because that's what you should be doing. See it more as like not a stop, but more of a reflection. And then you see the people around you and everything that's a bit more important, and then the bigger picture becomes secondary to that, and it's so much more natural and like organic that it doesn't feel like you're making these big statements and you're going to get it wrong because it's just slow progression.
Absolutely. Like I think what I've been reflecting on recently is a few months ago I was coming really close to being totally burnt out, and a friend of mine started talking to me about a concept that she's working on called radical self-care. And the concept is that if she's not putting herself first and if she's not in a good space, she's never going to achieve anything in her personal life or in her career that she actually wants to. And it sounds really like simple, but it's something that isn't in our mainstream structure. So it's not in our education system. It's not part of what we buy into on social media. Most of us are spending 3 hours a day on social media. So you're spending a huge portion of your day doing something that isn't directed a lot of the time towards your own well-being. And one of the things
could be actively harmful to your well-being
exactly.
in some cases.
Yeah. So it's like, well, what are the active steps that we need to take to look after ourselves? And in many ways, in the current climate, that's actually a radical thing to say. What is the active thing you need to do to look after yourself? And I've been going through these thought processes recently in the last months, and it's kind of bizarre how simple but radical it is, And I think there's lots of things you can do, and that point around vulnerability is so important. It's when you take that space to yourself and reflect on, actually, what am I vulnerable on here? What am I feeling upset about, or where am I feeling a bit uneasy about something? We have to reflect on those things, and I think it's too easy a lot of the time to just switch off that vulnerability because it's kind of scary or because it's kind of uncomfortable. But actually, if we delve into it, it's hugely beneficial, because it helps guide us then.
And there is no time limit for success. That's the other thing. Like, I think there's a lot of pressure now to be like, I need to pick the right college course so that immediately upon graduating, I'm going to go into my perfect job or my perfect postgrad, and that's not how the real world works. And if you put that much pressure on yourself, you're going to do more harm than good for most people in the long run.
Right. Yeah. There are a lot of questions about indeed the education system, and we are in a place, Science Gallery, that is based on the collision of art and science, and creating new opportunities and new curricula actually out of the convergence of art and sciences and the humanities and sciences. Maybe starting with Emily, you are. Sorry, Stacey. There are a lot of questions about how do you create a master's without a curriculum, without the structure of university. And I think, everybody touched indeed of this, dual role of education. On the one hand, it's very important that the structure certainly of the college and the university allows for incredible opportunities. But what is the role of, and what are the weaknesses of the formal education, and how we can overcome them? Which I know is a big thing, but back to you, Stacey. How do you make your own?
I think the main ingredient for me at the time was naivety. and the sheer amount I had no money. Because there were all these courses out here and I could see myself on them, but then when you read the kind of blurb of what that course offers, there's loopholes and I'm like, but that's not necessarily me, and that's a strength I have, but that isn't. And then the fact that I couldn't afford to get onto one of these courses was the kind of like final straw of like, well, it wasn't right anyway. You were doing it because that's what you thought you had to do. And if you take the time to just step back and think about what you'd have got from that year, is there another way around it? And so what I did personally was the course I wanted to do, I just started looking at like alumni from that course, but people also, because I was in design, people in that industry whose work I just really liked and who I would like to be around and in that space, but I have no idea how they got there. And naively, I just emailed them being like, I'm going to take a year to learn and figure out what my kind of thing is. If you don't mind, would you like set me a brief and just help teach me through this year? Because then my idea was that if I pick and, go like in a sweet shop of professionals and I can kind of choose like, oh, I like them because they do that and they're kind of more into this thing, then I'd have a little bit of all of that, and hopefully at the end I could kind of like streamline who I was. So it was kind of, I didn't expect anyone to actually be remotely bothered. And I emailed them all being like, hi, can you help me? I don't know what I'm doing. And then surprisingly, something kind of, I think, hits a chord with people where they're like, we've all been there. None of us really knew how we got here. And people are so willing to kind of give you a bit of a leg up if they can see that willing to kind of want and learn and do is there. And I don't think I had a single person say no. So over the kind of, and then it was kind of happening and I was like, oh God, I've got to do this now. And I've got to, not have a job and like not pay rent and stuff. But the kind of idea that people were rooting for you without ever meeting me or knowing me or anything like that was something that kind of gave me that first push. And then I realised like I can get the most out of this by directly knowing what I want from them and what they can give me, and then like outsourcing even further. And so now I've kind of got this kind of weird mashup of education, and I end up doing the strangest things and going on the strangest of subjects, and I don't know what the end goal is going to be, and I don't know I have this like makeshift MA, but I still don't know what the title of it is. And I think that's the most exciting thing for me at the minute, is that whatever this qualification I make up is, no one else has got it, and it's going to be completely tailored to me. And if anyone else was say to do it the next year, they would be able to kind of pick this bespoke thing. And there's something kind of special about being a one-off in something. And I think that's the kind of next step for a lot of people, that you don't know what it is, but it's worth giving it a go.
Wonderful. And for you, Emily, the art and the confluence of art and science, how do you tackle that in your own study and your own experience?
It's something that's very important to me, and I always loved where art and science would kind of touch a little bit. And when I was doing my undergraduate, my absolute favorite part of doing geology was geology involves so much drawing. And it's something that a lot of people go into geology not really realizing, and then they have to learn to draw, which can be a bit scary for people. But for me, I love drawing. So it was like a real way to connect back with what I the kind of creative part of me. And if you're a creative person and if you get joy out of creating things, it's very difficult to have a job or to have a life where you don't do at least some creative stuff. And I think that a lot of people find it in a hobby. But when I started my PhD, I realized I wanted to bring it more into my job, my work, my day-to-day, both because I think it would be good for me, and this goes back to like self-care. You know, it's important to find ways to look after yourself, but it's also important to use your strengths. You know, and it was a big strength for me, especially my MSc, that I was the one person. Everyone else was from a physics background, and when we would say like, oh, let's do up a map or let's do up a diagram, they would start coding it. And I would sketch it, and I'd be like, is this what we need? And they were like, oh, witchcraft. You coded it with your mind. So that was pretty great. And I become more and more interested in writing as I got older. And I thought, like, I need to find ways to use my whole self. And that can be a bit dangerous. Putting your whole self into something can be dangerous. But for me, it was, I think, the right choice. And I did hold something back. I also paint. That's my thing that I do at home without getting involved in the PhD. And the important thing for me is that I'm doing both at a high level. I don't want to water down the science in order to make it fit into some nice artsy thing that looks pretty or that reads nicely. And I also want to write at a high level. I don't want to be just throwing in some occasional similes, but not actually producing a piece of writing that works by itself. So in a way, I've made things harder for myself, but I'm also enjoying it a lot more. And I think that when you enjoy something like that, it gives you a lot more motivation. If I was just writing, I would talk to my friends who are also doing PhDs, and they would say things like, oh, I have to write this weekend, I have to get back to writing. Writing is like easily 40% of the job. If that's the thing that you dread, it's going to be really difficult for 6 years to be trying to do that, and I didn't want to end up in that place. So that's kind of where it came from, and I hope that it's going somewhere good.
Yeah, thank you. Ronan, this audience is particularly lucky because they gravitate around Science Gallery in all their cities, and Science Gallery is always striving to be at the forefront of art and science and the future of education. But from your experience, what would be the advice, or what would you tell, indeed, young people, also all the people who are following us on the webcast, how to nurture this mindset? I think, what we are talking here is really a mindset that goes beyond the skills and what is taught at school. What would be, from your experience, how do you nurture that, indeed, through a combination of school and out-of-school experiences?
Yeah, it's a really good question. How do you nurture the thing you're interested in? And if you don't know what you're interested in, how do you go and find it? For me, there were two things. The first was, when I was younger, was variety. So I was constantly going and trying new things. I would go and try art classes, I'd go and try different sports, I'd go and try... in college I went and sat in on different lectures for different courses, and I just kind of persistently kept trying different things until I found a combination of stuff that I was really interested in. But that was the first thing. The second and more important thing, again, was kind of some of the people I put around me to help me do those things. So it's very difficult kind of a lot of the time to go out on our own and do something, especially if you're going to a new group setting for the first time, or if you're going to somewhere new for the first time. It's always a lot easier if you have a friend who will say, look, will you come along to this thing with me, because I want to try it out and I don't want to go alone. So I was lucky that in college I found a couple of good friends who we all kind of agreed to go out and do things like that together. So I think if you can find even one person who is interested in the same thing as you, or who would be willing to go along with you to the odd mad random event, that's absolutely great, you know. And you can do it as a way of accountability, you know. I remember in college, me and one of my friends, it kind of got a bit stupid. It started out really positive, like it was kind of he would choose one thing to go to and I choose the next. And it started out really good, like we went and did gymnastics and I bust my nose trying to learn how to do a flip, and I went on like this. But eventually, like, he was insisting that we go to a ballet class, and I was like, I really don't want to, like, I have no interest in ballet, and neither do you, like, you're literally just dragging me along for this. But it's really good fun as well at the same time. And I think, like, the most important thing with all of this is it has to be playful, you know. I think there comes a stage in university when you're doing your LinkedIn profile and your CV and you have to put on a suit and go to an interview and people are talking about Deloitte and KPMG as the ultimate career success, and you're like, that doesn't fucking mean anything to me. Why would somebody want to be an accountant? Like, what? How do I get my head around that? You kind of have to, at that stage, resist the professional push, like resist people telling you need to now be super professional and stop being playful and stop being young. Like, it's a complete and utter fabrication, and everybody who ends up going like that ends up miserable anyway, so don't listen to them. Stay totally playful and stay, you know, like in our office, I remember we bought we were kitting out the office recently, and like the office equipment company, like, I insisted on them supplying a whiteboard that we could double up as a table tennis table, and it was such a headache, like you wouldn't believe, and it cost about twice as much, and but it was so worth it. Like, it's things like that where you have to insist on making your environment playful, like, and insist on the things you're doing being playful. And if you're in a situation or you're in a work environment where people are forcing you to be a way you don't want to be, maybe you're not in the right environment, you know, and just recognize that some people are suited to certain things and other people aren't. And if you're suited to the KPMG accountancy lifestyle, great, like, I don't want to bash that too much. It's just definitely not for me, like, and it's about, I think the point is that it's about recognizing what's for you, and just pursuing that and being a bit selfish about it, and trying to find people along the way who'll say, yeah, do you know what, everyone on LinkedIn is telling you need to be an accountant, but don't mind them, you're really suited to being an artist, or you're really suited to being something else. So find the people around you who will reinforce the person you want to be, you know.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Brian, what is your reaction to this? You touched indeed on this beautiful description of vulnerability, but at the same time there is also the playful fearlessness that I hear in many of the conversations. How do you reconcile? Well, how do you put the two together? What is your approach?
I have no idea.
That's
But could I come back to the question on kind of like how, or kind of the importance of combining art and science and education for a second? Because, sorry. What should we call it? Yeah, because one thing that I really think is that's the kind of separation of art and science within society is really kind of like as a result of kind of like capitalism and things like that, where that like inherently under capitalism, art becomes devalued, depoliticized, and kind of commodified to the extent that it just doesn't have any impact anymore. And then the sciences, for research purposes, become commodified to try and gain profit. And so they're kind of separated then, where at their core, they're both very sort of philosophical things with huge profundity. Like art is usually kind of used to, say, explore kind of aspects of like spirituality and things like that, and kind of like have that sort of profound impact. But science is equally profound, and that sort of like exploration of what it is to exist is kind of common between the two, and kind of in recombining them in education systems, you can kind of really have an amazing impact and make science more personal and kind of make it more kind of human, rather than have it kind of be this very sanitized reductionist thing.
Yeah.
And there was something else I had to add on to that, but it's kind of gone out of my head.
I think in the education system, lots of the the skills that we're told are good science skills. You know, when I was in school, I was good at maths, and people were like, you should be a scientist. But when I actually was a scientist, the things that maths was really useful, but so was curiosity, creativity, my drawing skills were so useful, you know, and none of those things were valued except by individual teachers who were good teachers. And they kind of fit that stuff in around the curriculum, which says, do lots of maths and learn lots of things off, which is not actually how real science, those things are important in science, but they're not the whole subject.
And as well as that, I think with the whole, like over the past couple of years and for the past like maybe decade or so, there's just been such a push on people to go like directly into STEM careers and completely ignoring kind of the creative side of things, which has been hugely detrimental and is, I would argue, almost a very kind of classist thing to do, because you are basically pushing people into these high-end jobs that suit these sort of like gentrified areas of Dublin and stuff like that, which puts massive pressure on working class communities and artists and things like that. And it's, whereas STEM, I think, has a huge responsibility to kind of not encroach on the other skills that are available within society and be like, oh, you need to upskill in this sort of area. It has more of a responsibility to be like, what can we do together and kind of collaborate. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But I think that's a really good description of the current climate. Touching back to one of the first questions we were asking, is what we've seen is the market has a demand for STEM. So capitalism has a demand for STEM, which is fine. There's a demand for that, and that's how we're going to push on and grow the economy. And it's also how we'll grow things in science and in innovation as well. But it kind of has gotten to a stage where it's almost like it's the priority now, and there's a subtle kind of sense of, well, STEM is more important actually, and I think that's kind of elitist. It's maybe an elitist, but it's kind of arrogant almost. It's kind of like STEM is the best thing for everybody. STEM is the best thing for you as a young girl in education, and we're going to tell you that it is. And great, we all want equal representation. But it's kind of, there's a nuance there, I think, that we're not really capturing, which is how does that influence on people's own personal freedom to choose what they want to do? And if we're pushing it too much in one way, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea. Like, I think people need, the priority is people need to be free to choose whatever they want to do.
And also like an accessibility thing, I think as well, because for me I had massive interest in science and all the more academic subjects, but I think academically I just would never have been able to pursue a career in that, and I'd have just crashed and burnt. So I obviously took the creative route, and I think now I'm starting to realise that I can kind of take a U-turn and pick them back up.
That's exactly
so I've always got the interest.
I was like, I can't do art, I'll crash and burn. I'll do science and come back around.
Because the interests are always there, and I think it's hard to be like, oh, you're not, just stop counting and things, go that way, draw something. But then it's quite nice to be like, wait a minute, no, I can take from that as much as I want from it as well. I don't need to be, at the forefront of research, but I can still have involvement in that field and say things about that, but in my own way. I think it's, do what you want.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I have the feeling we are just getting started on this conversation, which is really wonderful. But I'm also looking at the clock, and we have actually not so much time. But and the list of questions is almost overwhelming, which is a great thing. We'll go through this offline. I was just wondering, indeed, I would like to take actually some questions from you. The burning questions. You've heard indeed our speakers giving their life experiences and also some advice to you. Do you have any indeed question you want to ask now? Okay, that's the first one. Do we have a microphone, or do you want to shout?
Yeah, I think I can shout. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a purpose and you have an action plan for what your purpose is, and it seems like it's going to get a system that it has been established. But what was your strategy? What's your strategy for you to be successful with what you're doing against a system that has been established and that works for everyone, which is capitalism?
I might touch on that, yeah.
Sure.
The work that I'm doing is around social entrepreneurship, and a lot of the time the typical narrative around social entrepreneurship is you use entrepreneurship to solve a social problem. And that's what we're told social entrepreneurship is, and that's fine. But really, my interest in it is how can we use social entrepreneurship to reinvent and change our economies? So we've been told a certain narrative of there is one model of entrepreneurship, which is you set up a business, you're the only sole owner, you make millions and happy days. But there's a whole other plethora of different organizational models. The cooperative, for example, where a business is democratically owned. In the recession, cooperatives survived a ratio of 2-to-1 to standard businesses. So they were a lot more sustainable. There's all these other metrics out there that prove that other forms of socially driven organizations are a lot more environmentally friendly, have greater diversity, have higher fulfillment. A whole scientific body of research that says socially driven organizations are a lot better for our economy. And I think that that's what really interests me. So setting out on this journey, in Ireland, for example, there is no legal entity for a social enterprise. So immediately you're up against all of the funding is geared towards privately owned enterprise. So there's a massive barrier there because it's much more difficult to access the funding and the advice. And I think for me, starting out on that journey a couple of years ago and trying to access the funding, initially what I tried to do was change the system. So Enterprise Ireland, for example, the biggest funder of startups in Ireland, won't fund social enterprises. That you have to be a privately owned business, and they're pumping tens of millions into startups every year in Ireland, but no social enterprise can access them. And my initial approach was, right, well, Enterprise Ireland needs to change as an organisation, and trying to get the organisation to change. And that's a whole other mission on its own. And I think what you have to do is be really strategic and clever around how much can you chew off, and how much can you swap, how much can you take on. And for me, I suppose, starting out at that early stage, it was a recognition of, right, that's a bigger battle, and yes, it's something that is really aligned with what I want to do, but it's not the thing to do right now. What we need to be focused on is our own growth and our own development as an organisation, and finding ways to do that in other areas, because there are pockets. If you keep looking, even though the system might be set up against you or set up not, I wouldn't say set up against us. I don't think it's a conscious thing that somebody decided to set it up and say, let's not support social enterprise. I think it's more of an evolutionary thing, and it just is the way it is. But I think what you have to do is recognise, right, well, where are the angles we can go and how can we make it work and build it over time? I think what we're starting to see now is, going back 3 years and Enterprise Ireland wouldn't have a meeting with us, and now we're going in to meet the chairman of Enterprise Ireland, because we've demonstrated, well, actually, look, this is the impact we've had, these are the amount of jobs we've created, and we've created more jobs in a more efficient way than the businesses you've supported. So go and do it in your own way, and then come back and kind of recognise, you don't have to take on you don't have to take on the system, is what I'm saying to begin with. But if you do choose to take on the system, recognise that that's the only thing you should be doing. Because there's a point around all of this where, like, eventually you will get to a point, if you try and do too many things at once, that none of them will be done effectively. So you have to make a decision about what is the single thing I'm going to do and do well. And if I could go back, I was very close to becoming that activist versus entrepreneur. And I think a lot of the time as well, for anybody who's interested in social change, don't get fooled by the social enterprise myth as the big thing to solve. And I'm a social entrepreneur, right? The thing that I hate is everybody saying social entrepreneurship is the key to all of our social problems. It's a load of rubbish. It's a way of depoliticizing so many of our political issues.
Yeah.
Right? People will tell, well, low wages, set up a social enterprise and that will solve the low wages issue. Well, no, it won't. Legislation to increase low wages. Housing, let's set up social housing cooperatives, which is the way. Yeah, they work, but actually the government should just bloody build houses. And what we need is activists to go and campaign and lobby for that. So, it's a talking point there, just to be careful about be careful what narrative you follow, is what I'm saying,
Wonderful. Let's see. Yep.
So you've talked already about suggestions for structural changes that should happen, like in schools that or in universities, all levels, that you should be able to have more credits for extracurricular or encourage that freedom. But do you have any suggestions for before those kind of things actually come into place? how can you or how can we inform and support people to forge their own path who might not, like you guys have obviously all come to that, you found yourself at that point where you're like, okay, this isn't working for me, I'm going to go and do this. But maybe some people, they don't have that peer group around them of people who are also doing that, and they don't see those possibilities. Like I went to school where everyone was encouraged kind of just to go on to university, but a huge percentage of people then dropped out of that because that wasn't what suited them, and then they found other things, and that's fine to find other things, but they also could have gotten more support, I felt, at the school level to think about different possibilities. So I don't know if you have any suggestions, practical suggestions for ways that we can create those communities or give support or ideas to people who might be looking for a different path.
Well, the great thing these days is that because we have the internet, you don't have to have somebody in your school doing something in order to find out about it, you know? So if there's an area that you're interested in or a direction that you're considering, I think we all benefit at all stages, regardless of who you are or what you're doing. Everyone can benefit from self-reflection. Think about who you are, where you're going, define success. To touch back on the last point, you need to think about what success will look like for you. What is the most important thing for you? Is it to stay in your family? Is it to make lots of money? Is it to have a big house? Is it to have a big family? You need to kind of see where you're going, and you can change, absolutely change. But at every stage, if you think about where you're going, and then use the resources that you do have, whether that's teachers who might be supportive, parents, other people that you know, people that you just find on the internet, tweet at us or email us, and say, like Stacey said, when she reached out to people were very happy to help. I think a lot of people are very happy to help, especially if you come and flatter us and are like, you've done something amazing. Tell me more about your amazing life. So until we have a more structured system in place for helping people to find different paths, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to reach out to people. Think about what you want and think about how to get there. And if you don't know how to get there, ask.
Yeah.
I would completely agree with that, and just kind of in terms of reaching out to people. And if you have an idea, just maybe put your idea a little bit together, and then just reach out to people who you think would be really interested in that.
Yeah.
And then you can build a community yourself. You don't need to look to other communities that already exist. You can start building a community for yourself. But there is also a massive onus on organizations like Science Gallery or other ones who have built up these communities to do more outreach. And I think that's a huge problem, particularly when you see, like Science Gallery or Coder Dojo or things like that offer these kind of alternative skills and extracurricular activities, is that a lot of them are very Dublin-centric. And so there's a huge rural-urban divide there as well. And it's a huge point of contention that I've had with a number of groups recently, is that there isn't any focus in community development outside of Dublin. And yeah, that's something really important in outreach that I would like a lot of the groups that I'm involved in to focus on a little bit more. So there is an onus on the communities that exist to do more outreach as well. But also you can start and create communities yourself.
Yeah. Well, I guess we have now an opportunity to do that, because on the one hand it's bad because we need to close this session, but lunch will be a wonderful opportunity actually to keep on this conversation. And as you've heard, indeed, approach the speakers. This morning we were encouraged to make a lunch date. Probably your lunch days will be very busy today. But I would like...
Set up a queue.
Exactly, yeah. Use the opportunity today and in the future, of course, to connect with the speakers, with each other. We've heard indeed how important that is. I would like to really thank our speakers. You've been really wonderful. I wish indeed we had the whole day to keep on this conversation, but we can't. So thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, for being here, for your wonderful questions. I'm afraid indeed we answered a few of those, but indeed use the rest of the day to keep digging into those questions and connect with our speakers and with each other. Thank you.